The atmosphere inside the congressional hearing room was tense, almost suffocating, as if the air itself was waiting for a spark. Governor Greg Abbott sat at the witness table with the confidence of a veteran politician who believed very little could surprise him anymore. After decades in Texas politics, he carried himself like someone fully in control. His wheelchair was positioned squarely in the center, perfectly framed for the cameras that tracked his every movement. When he leaned toward the microphone, it was with the smooth, rehearsed comfort of a man who had testified before Congress countless times. On this day, Abbott was there to promote what he described as his latest major policy achievement, the Community Protection Act. He had been marketing the bill across Texas as a direct response to public safety fears. Presenting it as a solution to rising crime and social disorder, his opening remarks were carefully crafted and delivered with precision. Every sentence sounded familiar, polished, and tailored to resonate with his political base. He spoke confidently about law and order, framing the proposal as a practical and necessary step. "All we're doing is giving law enforcement the tools they need to keep our communities safe," Abbott said, his voice carrying a blend of Texas-style bravado and political authority. The message was clear and simple, at least on the surface: safety, security, and support for police. For many in the room, it sounded like standard political language they had heard countless times before, several seats down the long witness table. Representative Jasmine Crockett listened without moving, her focus sharp and unwavering. The 42-year-old congresswoman from Dallas had earned a reputation for two defining traits: relentless preparation and zero tolerance for misleading political narratives. While other committee members nodded along politely, checked their phones, or whispered quietly to aides, Crockett remained fully engaged. Her pen glided across her notepad, not just recording information, but organizing an argument. She wasn't casually listening. She was constructing a legal case in real time. In the 72 hours leading up to the hearing, she had done what she always did before a critical moment: studied every word of the proposed bill, compared it with constitutional standards, consulted civil rights and civil liberties experts, and reviewed real-world outcomes from similar legislation passed in other states. By the time Abbott finished his presentation, he had painted a dramatic picture of a Texas under threat. He described rising crime, overburdened police departments, and neighborhoods living in constant fear. According to his narrative, the solution was straightforward and urgent: expand police authority, introduce new categories of prohibited behavior, and give prosecutors broader powers to go after those who break the law. On the surface, it sounded reasonable, even logical. The language was wrapped in common-sense framing that made opposition seem almost irresponsible. After all, who would argue against keeping people safe? But Crockett had looked far beyond the talking points. She had carefully examined sections 7 through 12 of the bill, where the real implications were buried. The wording in those sections was so vague and expansive that it could easily turn a peaceful protest into a felony offense. It could potentially classify a critical social media post as criminal behavior. Even more concerning, it gave law enforcement the authority to shut down gatherings preemptively if they decided an event might become disruptive. To Crockett, these weren't hypothetical risks. They were predictable outcomes supported by legal precedent and past examples from other states. As the tension in the room quietly built, the committee chairman glanced down at the agenda and made the announcement everyone had been anticipating. The chair now recognizes Representative Crockett of Texas for 5 minutes of questioning. Instantly, the mood shifted. Reporters in the press gallery straightened in their seats. Camera operators adjusted their framing. Staffers lining the back wall stopped talking altogether. Anyone who had been watching Crockett's rapid rise in Congress knew her questioning rarely stayed confined to 5 minutes, and it almost never unfolded the way witnesses expected. Before continuing, make sure to hit the subscribe button and leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from. What happens next is a textbook example of how a well-prepared lawmaker dismantles a political argument step by step. You won't want to miss a single moment of what follows. Crockett calmly adjusted her microphone, her movements measured and deliberate. She locked eyes with Abbott before speaking, setting the tone immediately. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," she began, her voice clear and steady throughout the chamber. "Governor Abbott, I appreciate you appearing before this committee to discuss your Community Protection Act. Before we get into the specifics, I want to be sure I understand your main claim. You're telling us this bill is essential to keeping Texans safe. Is that correct?" Abbott gave a firm nod, his confidence unchanged. "That's exactly right, Congresswoman. Public safety is my highest priority, and this legislation gives law enforcement the resources and authority they need to protect our communities," Abbott said firmly. Jasmine Crockett responded with a slow, thoughtful nod, as if weighing his words. "And throughout your testimony," she continued, "you've repeatedly said this bill is about fighting crime, protecting families, and supporting police officers. Those are goals I believe everyone in this room agrees are important. Is that fair to say?" Abbott's smile grew a little wider. "I'm glad we can find some common ground, Representative." That moment of agreement, however, was exactly the opening Crockett had been aiming for. "Common ground is always a good place to begin," she replied, her voice still calm but now edged with something sharper. The shift was subtle, but everyone in the chamber felt it. "So let's talk about what this bill actually does, Governor. Not the talking points. Not the press release version. I mean what is written in the legislation you're asking Congress to fund and support." She lifted a thick stack of papers, the bill itself clearly marked with colored tabs, highlights, and handwritten notes. Section 7 of the Community Protection Act creates a new offense called organized disruption, Crockett said. "Can you explain to this committee what qualifies as organized disruption under your definition?" Abbott adjusted slightly in his seat, his media-trained smile still intact. "That section is meant to address situations where groups intentionally disrupt public order, block roadways, or interfere with lawful commerce. It's basic, common-sense public safety legislation." Crockett nodded again and flipped to a flagged page. "Then let me read the exact language, Governor, because I think the American people deserve to hear precisely what you're proposing." She read aloud. "Organized disruption shall be defined as any gathering of 3 or more persons that creates or has the potential to create interference with normal activities, traffic flow, business operations, or public services." She looked up. "Governor, under this definition, couldn't a group of college students protesting tuition hikes on a public sidewalk be charged with organized disruption? Couldn't parents gathering outside a school board meeting to speak about their children's education be arrested? Couldn't workers picketing for better wages be prosecuted?" Abbott's smile tightened as he responded. "Those examples are hypothetical." "They're not hypothetical at all," Crockett said smoothly, cutting in without raising her voice. "They are everyday, protected First Amendment activities that happen across Texas and across this country. And your bill turns them into crimes." A low murmur spread through the room. Several committee members leaned forward, some flipping through their own copies of the bill to follow along more closely. Abbott tried to regain control of the exchange. "Congresswoman, I believe you're misinterpreting the intent of the legislation." "I'm not interpreting anything," Crockett shot back, her tone firmer now. "I'm reading your words and I'm not finished." She flipped to another tab. Section 9 authorizes law enforcement to disperse any gathering they believe has the potential to become disruptive, before any disruption actually happens. That's prior restraint. "Governor, the Supreme Court has been clear for decades that the government cannot shut down speech based on what it thinks might happen." Abbott leaned toward the microphone. "Representative, with all due respect, public safety does not override the Constitution," Crockett interrupted sharply. "And that's exactly what your bill attempts to do." The intensity in the room continued to rise, and it was clear she was just getting started. "Now, let's move to Section 11, she said, giving Abbott a moment to regroup. "This section creates criminal penalties for using social media or other electronic communications to coordinate activities that may result in disruption." She then turned her gaze directly toward the camera, ensuring the public was listening just as closely as the committee. "Governor, Do you realize what your bill actually criminalizes? Crockett asked. You've made it illegal for everyday citizens to use Facebook, Twitter, or even text messages to organize a protest. You've turned the most basic tools of democratic participation into evidence of a criminal conspiracy. Abbott's face began to redden as the pressure mounted. Those sections include safeguards, he said. Where are they? Crockett shot back. Show me the safeguards, Governor. Because I've read this bill from beginning to end 3 separate times. I've also had constitutional law professors from the University of Texas, SMU, and Baylor review it. And do you know what every single one of them said? They said this bill wouldn't survive its first constitutional challenge. They called it a direct attack on the First Amendment. And they said it's designed to do exactly what it does: silence dissent and criminalize protest. The low murmurs in the hearing room grew louder. Abbott shifted strategies, adopting a slightly condescending tone. Representative Crockett, I understand that as someone who is newer to Congress, these issues might seem— Governor Abbott, Crockett interrupted sharply, her voice cutting through the room. I'm going to stop you right there. Her tone was firm, unyielding. Before coming to Congress, I spent 15 years as a civil rights attorney. I have represented protesters who were arrested for exercising their First Amendment rights. I have challenged unconstitutional laws just like this one in both state and federal courts. So please don't insult my intelligence or waste this committee's time by suggesting I don't understand exactly what I'm reading. The room fell completely silent. Abbott's patronizing expression disappeared, replaced by clear discomfort. Even several Republican members of the committee looked uneasy as the exchange unfolded. Sensing the shift, Crockett continued without hesitation. Let's talk about the real-world consequences of legislation like yours, Governor, because we don't have to speculate. We've already seen what happens. She held up another set of documents. After the George Floyd protests in 2020, at least 17 states passed laws similar to the one you're proposing. She began listing examples one by one. In Oklahoma, grandmother activists were arrested for gathering outside the state capitol to oppose education budget cuts. In Florida, environmental activists were charged with felonies for organizing a beach cleanup that included signs about climate change. In Iowa, disability rights advocates were prosecuted for blocking access to a senator's office while protesting cuts to health care. With each example, Abbott's tension became more visible. Crockett wasn't dealing in theory anymore. She was laying out concrete evidence of how these laws were used to silence ordinary Americans exercising their constitutional rights. But here's what concerns me most, Crockett continued, her voice now carrying the measured intensity of a prosecutor. Your bill goes even further than those state laws. She flipped to another marked section. Section 12 creates civil liability for anyone who provides material support to activities that lead to arrests under this act. Do you understand what that means? She leaned in. If a church hands out water bottles to protesters on a hot day, they can be sued. If a local business allows activists to use their restroom, they can be held legally responsible. If a lawyer offers free legal advice to someone arrested under this law, they can be penalized. Crockett paused, letting the implications sink in. Governor, you are not just criminalizing protest. You are trying to make it impossible for communities to support one another while exercising their constitutional rights. That isn't public safety legislation, she concluded. That's authoritarianism. The word lingered in the room like a sudden crack of thunder. Journalists began typing at full speed, their keyboards clicking nonstop. Camera flashes went off in rapid bursts. Governor Abbott's expression had shifted completely. What started as confidence had turned into defensiveness, and now clear frustration was written across his face. Representative Crockett, he said tightly, that characterization is completely unfair. Is it? Crockett fired back without hesitation. Let me ask you something directly, Governor. Under your Community Protection Act, could the civil rights marchers who walked from Selma to Montgomery in 1965 have been arrested? Abbott paused, immediately sensing the historical weight of the question. The historical context is completely different, he began. Answer the question, Governor, Crockett pressed. Yes or no? Could they have been arrested under your law? Abbott tried to stall. It would depend on the specific circumstances. Yes or no, Governor? Crockett repeated firmly. It's a simple question. Would the Selma Marchers people fighting for voting rights, one of the most fundamental rights in a democracy, be considered criminals under your Community Protection Act? Abbott's jaw clenched. The intent of that march and the intent of this bill are completely— That's not what I asked, Crockett interrupted. I asked whether they could be arrested, and the answer is yes. Under Section 7, they were 3 or more people interfering with traffic flow. Under Section 9, law enforcement could have dispersed them based on so-called disruptive potential. Under Section 12, the churches that fed them and the families that sheltered them could have been held legally liable. Governor, your bill would have made the civil rights movement illegal. The room exploded into noise. Republicans called out for order. Democrats broke into applause. Reporters shouted questions over one another. Governor Abbott sat frozen at the witness table as the carefully crafted narrative he brought into the hearing collapsed in real time. But Crockett wasn't done. She lifted her copy of the U.S. Constitution, a gesture that had become a hallmark of her most forceful hearings. Governor Abbott, she said, her voice cutting cleanly through the chaos. The First Amendment does not say Congress shall make no law, abridging freedom of speech unless someone in power decides that speech is disruptive. It does not say the right to peacefully assemble shall not be infringed unless a governor claims public safety requires it. It says these rights shall not be abridged, period. She pointed directly at the bill in front of Abbott. This legislation violates those rights on nearly every page. You came before this committee trying to sell it as common-sense public safety, hoping no one would actually read it. Well, Governor, I read it. My staff read it. Constitutional scholars read it. And we all reached the same conclusion. Her voice remained steady but uncompromising. This bill is dangerous. It is unconstitutional. And it has no place in a free society. Abbott made one final attempt to regain control. Representative, if you would just allow me to explain the full context. The context. Crockett responded immediately. Is that you are asking for federal funds to support a state law that criminalizes constitutional rights? And this committee would be failing its duty if it gave you even a single dollar for that purpose. She turned toward the committee chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move that we immediately table any consideration of federal funding for Texas's Community Protection Act pending a full constitutional review by the Congressional Research Service. Several Democrats quickly seconded the motion. The chairman, clearly caught off guard by the dramatic shift, called for order and said the motion would be taken under advisement. As the hearing moved on to other members' questions, one thing was already clear: the damage had been done. Governor Abbott's effort to frame his proposal as calm, reasonable public safety policy had been thoroughly taken apart step by step. Clips of Representative Jasmine Crockett's questioning began circulating across social media almost immediately. Within an hour, headlines and hashtags declaring "Crockett destroys Abbott" were trending nationwide. Legal experts didn't wait to weigh in. Former Attorney General Eric Holder posted online, saying that Crockett's questioning of Governor Abbott was a masterclass in constitutional law and congressional oversight, adding that this was exactly how hearings are supposed to function. Civil liberties organizations echoed that assessment. The ACLU released a public statement praising Crockett for clearly identifying why the Texas Community Protection Act posed a serious threat to fundamental freedoms. Citing her detailed and accurate constitutional analysis, even voices from the conservative legal world began to retreat from their earlier support. One well-known conservative law professor admitted during a Fox News interview that, after watching Crockett's questioning, he had grown deeply concerned about portions of the bill he had not fully examined before, especially the prior restraint provisions, which he described as constitutionally dangerous. By that evening, Governor Abbott's office issued a defensive response, claiming the bill had been misrepresented and reaffirming his commitment to public safety. But by then, the political momentum had already shifted. Texas lawmakers who had been ready to advance the legislation suddenly expressed hesitation. National Republican figures who were preparing to introduce similar measures in other states quietly put those plans on hold. The fallout continued to grow. Just 3 days after the hearing, the Congressional Research Service released a preliminary review of the Community Protection Act. The analysis found that multiple sections raised serious First Amendment concerns and would almost certainly face immediate constitutional challenges if the bill became law. 2 weeks later, under increasing pressure and with the proposal now widely viewed as politically toxic, Abbott announced he was reevaluating key portions of the legislation. Legal experts understood what that announcement really meant. The bill was effectively finished, not defeated by partisan politics, but by constitutional scrutiny and one lawmaker's refusal to let dangerous language hide behind public safety messaging. For Jasmine Crockett, the hearing marked another major moment in her rapidly growing national profile. Yet when asked about it later at a local town hall in Texas, she shifted the focus away from herself. "I didn't go after Governor Abbott as a person," she explained. "I challenged a bill that would have turned constitutional rights into criminal offenses. That's my responsibility." Reading legislation carefully, understanding how it affects real people, and speaking up when something threatens the freedoms Americans value. During that town hall, a grandmother in the audience stood up, visibly emotional. She shared that she had once been arrested while participating in a peaceful protest against pollution near her grandchildren's school. "Thank you for reading those bills so carefully," she said. "Thank you for understanding what they really mean for people like me." Someone captured the moment on a phone and the video spread quickly online. It perfectly illustrated why Crockett's questioning had struck such a deep chord. She hadn't just created a viral clip or scored political points. She had defended the constitutional principles that protect every American's right to speak, to assemble, to petition their government, and to demand accountability from those in power. If this detailed breakdown of how Jasmine Crockett systematically dismantled Greg Abbott's unconstitutional legislation resonated with you, hit the like button and subscribe for more in-depth coverage of the moments that shape American politics. Leave a comment telling us which issue you'd like to see Crockett take on next. And share this video with anyone who cares about defending constitutional rights. Your support helps us continue covering these critical stories about protecting American democracy.